read Charles and just tell him, pick it up and see. All right, so also on the Bill Whittle members page, question from Brian Yoder. Hey, senpai. I have no idea what that means. Have you read these authors? What do you think of them? Ambrose, Bierce? No, I have not. And the reason I haven't read Ambrose, Bierce was because I've read every single thing that the next person on the list, which is Mark Twain, wrote. And the little I've seen of Ambrose Bierce just looks like Twain light, you know. It's like it's John the Baptist compared to Jesus. I haven't read a lot of Ambrose Bierce because the little I've read just seems to me like I can get from Twain much better. What do I think of Mark Twain? I think Mark Twain is one of the three people that I have in highest esteem in the literary and fictional world. I think Mark Twain is not just brilliant. He's timelessly brilliant. His take on people and how things worked is as fresh today as it was when he wrote it. And of all the things that I admire, that I like about Twain, the way he set up his own character and the legend he built around himself made it possible for him to get a laugh with a single word because of the character he created for himself. It's absolutely brilliant, and it's so self-deprecating. I think I remember seeing that Mark Twain said that his family tree was a gallows, you know, and he said the two most beautiful words in the English language are "not guilty," and on and on and on with this whole thing. So you could just get an enormous laugh out of these things, and it was a remarkable construction. Now, there is a guy on YouTube, and I don't know if they claimed it was a recording of Mark Twain's voice. There was no recording of Mark Twain's voice that I'm aware of. None of it in existence yet, anyway, that has been found. There is movie footage of Mark Twain taken by Thomas Edison at Mark Twain's house, Stormfield. And the part of it that is so hard, and this is just a couple months before he died, and the part of it that's so frustrating about watching this is here's motion picture footage of Mark Twain, and because it's so early in the movie, in the idea of movies, that it is so wide, the shot is so wide, it's like, here's Mark Twain and Mark Twain's house. And I can see all of his house, and here's a little guy in white. And here's Mark Twain in his garden. And here's a guy who maybe takes up a third or fourth of the frame, head to toe. And you're looking, and here's Mark Twain talking to his daughters, and he's sitting out there having tea with his daughters, and you might as well be in the next county. And I watched this, I said, for God's sakes, man, can we please get a close-up? Just one. Can we just get one close-up? But in any event, we have plenty of still close-ups, still pictures of him. Mark Twain said that there used to be a Mark Twain look-alike contest because that's another thing he did. He was iconic looking. He would dress in white and go into a banquet where everybody's dressed in black, and he'd be dressed in white head to toe. And people would question him about it. He said, I know my clothes are clean because I can see when they get dirty. Your clothes could be filthy for all we know. But there were Mark Twain look-alike contests. And people would send him photographs showing how much they looked like him, and he got so tired of this that somebody sent him a picture of him. A guy who looked like Mark Twain sent Mark Twain a picture of himself. See how much I look like you? And Twain wrote him back and said, it's absolutely astonishing, the likeness. From now on, I'm going to use this photo to shave. I mean, that's as good as it gets. I miss him. I feel like he was a friend. He had a quality of writing that made you feel like he was a friend. Like, it was just so open and so accessible that I mean, when I said I've read everything Mark Twain wrote, I mean, I read everything. I read the letters he wrote. I've read transcripts of his speeches, not to mention all of the other things. And he was a remarkable guy, fascinated by technology, very bad with money, which is what you'd expect. And Hemingway, of all, was it Hemingway say this? Hemingway said that that American literature started with Huckleberry Finn. I think he's right about that. But somebody commented, it might have been Hemingway or somebody else said that it's very, very, very unusual for a writer to have the ability to perform. I think it was Hemingway who said that the difference between writing and performing is there's such antithetical experiences that the idea of a writer who could be a good performer or a performer who could be a good writer was beyond beyond Hemingway's ability to understand, and that's certainly true. He was a great show. Anyway, what I was going to say about that YouTube thing is, there's no recording of Mark Twain's voice. There is a recording of a guy who knew Mark Twain, who listened to him, seen him several times, doing his impersonation of Mark Twain. And that's as close as we're going to get. And it's not pleasant. It's not what you were hoping it would be. I'd known for a long time that Lincoln's voice was very much higher. Oh, Lincoln is always portrayed. No, Daniel Day-Lewis got it exactly right. People, when I was reading a book, he would, just 20 years ago, they would say when Lincoln would introduce himself in a meeting or something, he'd start off by saying, "Mr. Cheerman." That's how he would spell it, Cheerman. That's how it sounded, Mr. Cheerman. And Daniel Day-Lewis's Lincoln is magnificent. It's absolutely perfect. Robert Heinlein, yeah, Heinlein is brilliant. Heinlein, Heinlein's easy to mock, and people do, and Starship Troopers is a perfect example of a left-winger trying to steal the glory of a real writer, and then at the same time completely destroying what it was the guy was trying to say, turning it into a mockery. But Heinlein is he's like the paragon of practicality. He is the kind of guy that cuts through all the BS and simply just like, okay, this is when you get down to brass tacks and you're finished, kind of dicking around. This is where you're going to be. So yeah, I've read a lot of Heinlein. I like him very much. I've read next name on the list is Ayn Rand. I read Atlas Shrugged. I read it all, and that was work. Ayn Rand and her entire objectivist philosophy. Objectivism is brilliant. It's really brilliant, and when she's writing about encroachment of people's liberties, she's insanely good. But in between these nuggets of wisdom, there's some really, really, really bad melodramatic kind of, and you can kind of look at Ayn Rand and see that you're really dealing with kind of a thinking machine there rather than a feeling machine. But Atlas Shrugged's a classic, and not so much the novel as just the entire take on it, that the people who produce things, that the people who advance human society are the ones who are preyed upon. They're had their inventions taken away. They're taxed into oblivion. They're absolutely they're taken. They're treated as a food source for vampires, and nobody's made that case better than her. That the people that do things are constantly just fed upon by masses of people that take things. And her description of how things are taken and how this, and the justifications they use is just grand. Next name on the list is Lord Tennyson. I have to say I have not read any of Lord Tennyson. I know who he is, but I'm not a big poetry guy, I'm sorry to say. And H.P. Lovecraft, I have not read, although I'm familiar with his work. The whole Cthulhu thing is kind of cool. That whole kind of dark world. I noticed earlier in the comment section when we were talking about Star Wars, some people had mentioned Warhammer 40K, which is another science fiction franchise. Started out as a board game, and which I've gotten deeply involved with because the lore, the background material on 40K is so good. It's so good. It's just so well written, so well thought out, so well fleshed out, and it's so dark. It's just so dark, you know. It's and that's why it's wonderful. It's like a universe that is just a perpetual horror movie. There's nothing but fighting, and there's nothing but dying, and then there's nothing but just this brutality of this religion, and you know, the emperor of mankind is this super gigantic psychic who's been mortally wounded, and he's inside this golden throne. He's basically inside a like a pressure chamber, and he's just slowly dying. He's the corpse god, you know. And so his symbol is the skull. It is so bloody dark, but it's so impressive. And there was one piece of video out. I guess it was either a fan film or maybe part of a cutscenes from a 40K game, but it shows a parade on the home world, a victory parade, and you see these things just marching, and it's so revolting because it's so real. You know, you can see the Nazis, and you can see these. Then behind them are the Astartes, and they're even bigger. You know, and but the thing about like 40K would be then there's like like some kind of a barge or something that's being pulled by like poles coming out of the side. It's being pushed, and it's pushed by maybe 20 naked men with bags over their heads who are like prisoners of some kind, and they're just humiliating them. It's just horrible, and it's fascinating, and that kind of Lovecraft thing is really built into 40K, because in 40K the whole universe is just a very dangerous, hostile place to be. There's this dimension called the Warp, which is basically another dimension that you can travel through, but it's filled with monsters and evil creatures, and they constantly sneaking into our world, and just it's fantastic. It's really, really, really clear. The armor is so stylized. I mean, these guys have got shoulder plates, you know, that are out to here, and they're wearing this battle armor, and the reason that they're done that way, well, originally is because they had to paint these miniatures, and you can't get very little thin details on miniatures. But the main thing is to make the head very small. Like the head is almost barely, not even there. It's all just brawn. Fantastic. Orson Scott Card, I've read some of his novels. I thought they were great. George Orwell is a genius, and I did an essay, or maybe it was a firewall, I think, called Reading Orwell Backwards. And what you find is if you go back in Orwell, if you start at 1984, and then you go to Animal Farm, he becomes a little more liberal. And then as you get to, you know, the books that he spent in London, and then one called, I think the Pier at Wigan Pier. Wigan is a working class neighborhood in Lancashire. It's where my family's from. And he basically is, at that point, he's kind of a social justice warrior. He's a socialist and all the other things. And the thing about Orwell is, if you read him start to finish, he was in the Spanish Civil War, was wounded in the Spanish Civil War, shot through the neck, as I recall. If you read him front to back, in the order that he lived his life, you start out with a guy who's a very big left-wing liberal socialist who over time becomes more and more and more disillusioned by what socialism actually is, to the point that he writes this masterpiece of the horrors of this sort of totalitarianism. And so many people today think that this Big Brother is a right winger, and Big Brother is Ingsoc, it's English socialism. He's Stalin, and 1984 is an absolute masterpiece. The Road to Wigan Pier. Thank you, Martin. It's brilliant. And then finally, Aldous Huxley, and I've seen a little bit of Brave New World, but I haven't really read much of his stuff. So anyway, that's that.